Who was Gorm the Old? Well, Gorm created the Kingdom of Denmark, which still exists to this very day, and he's also one of the most famous Viking leaders of all time. A lot of the time, Gorm is looked at as the first king of Denmark, and this is not true at all. He's the one who unified the country and has historical documents to back him up. Before Gorm was his father Harthacnut, or Canute I, and he was a legendary king of Denmark. And this is because a lot of his origins are not very clear, and a lot of the time they are wrapped in legendary tales. For example, the tale of Ragnar's sons mentions that Harthacnut was the son of a Northumbrian princess and the legendary Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and Sigurd was the son of Ragnar Lodrok. Saxo Grammaticus also wrote that Canute I was the son of Eric, who was a descendant of Ragnar. There are a few other sources as well, but these get even more confusing. For example, Adam of Bremen mentions someone by the name of Hardigon, and he is referred to as the father of Harthacnut, but sometimes they are seen as the same person because their name is so similar. The confusion about the origin and details of Harthacnut show why he is a semi-legendary figure, and not necessarily a historical figure like his son. Gorm was born sometime before the year 900, and then he began ruling as a king in 936. He's often credited with unifying Denmark, but the details of the unification are somewhat arcane. Both the works of Adam of Bremen and the Rosklide Chronicle mention that the country was divided by multiple kings, and sometimes the entire country would unite. So it is very likely that this was not the first time Denmark unified, but this was the one that lasted. In fact, this probably should not be seen as a unification, but in the text it's suggested that Gorm, like his father and then later his son, subjugated certain parts of Denmark one at a time. The Olav Tryggvason saga puts things into perspective and really helps make you understand why Gorm was such an influential king. And I think it's my favorite quote about Gorm. King Gorm came with his army into that kingdom of Denmark, which was called Rydgotaland, but now is called Jelland, against the king, who then ruled therefore. He was called Gnupa. They had some battles together, but thus it ended that Gorm felled the king and acquired his whole kingdom. Next, Gorm encountered against the king of the name Silfrasgalli, and had fightings and battles with him, and King Gorm still got the victory, and finally he felled that king. Then he went further up in Jutland, and thus he came with war, that he destroyed all kings right south to Slee. And also he won a large kingdom in Wendland. Gorm had many battles against the Saxons, and he became the mightiest king. So at this period of time, it's thought that Gorm's kingdom spans from the island east of Jutland, and if we dissect this text, we see that Gorm and his armies first went west to Jutland, and then they moved south, and they even fought against the Saxons, and they moved into Wendland, which is pretty far in what is now modern-day Germany. I should also make clear that the land that Gorm claimed, a lot of it anyway, was already part of Denmark. It's just now these petty kingdoms ceased, and they were now part of Gorm's kingdom. So it really makes sense that Gorm's capital of his kingdom lies right in the middle of Jutland, in a little village called Juling. It makes sense because he was probably trying to secure his claims in all of his new claimed land. There's also a pretty good theory that suggests that Gorm's kingdom was only the western half of Denmark, which consisted of the islands of Funen and the mainland of Jutland, while the eastern side spanned from the other islands to Skane in Holland, which is now in modern-day Sweden, and this was still called Denmark as well. It's possible that Gorm's wife, Thyra, was a princess from the eastern side of Denmark, and Gorm hoped to unite the two with his offspring. Not all of the descriptions of Gorm were as flattering as the first one I showed you. For example, Saxo Grammaticus writes, although he was considered to be exceptionally tall, then, however, his mind only slightly corresponded to his body, for he was to such a degree satisfied with his royal power that he found greater joy to protect it than increasing it, figured it better to guard his own than to stretch out after others, and preferred to stick to what he had than letting it grow by new winnings. I don't know how a lot of this can be explained. All I know is a lot of the future sources, when talking about Gorm, look back on how grand his kingdom was. So the only thing I can get out of this is maybe, like the first source, it mentioned his battles with the Saxons. That could have been strictly defense, and maybe that took a lot of resources from the kingdom so he couldn't expand further. A more ruthless description of Gorm comes from Adam of Bremen. He says, Hardicanute Worm, meaning Gorm, son of Hardicanute, although this is disputed, ruled the Danes during that time. He was, I must say, a horrible worm and not a little hostile to Christian people. He was scheming to completely eradicate the Christianity that existed in Denmark, expelling the god's ministers from his country, and he killed even very many of them under torments. Now, we don't really know how true this is, and the bias is hopefully pretty obvious because this comes from a Christian source at the time, and they didn't really favor the pagans. But this does suggest that Gorm stuck to his pagan roots, and he didn't convert to Christianity like his descendants did. So, in Gorm's capital, it's probably most famous for the Yulling stones, and the first Yulling stone was put up by Gorm, and it was to pay tribute to his deceased wife, Thyra. It's also suggested that Gorm built the southern mound in Yulling for Thyra, and she may have been a princess of Wessex or a princess of some part of Denmark, according to different sources. The stone reads something like, King Gormr made this monument in memory of Thyra, his wife, Denmark's adornment. There are some sources that say that Thyra helped build the Danevirke, which was a southern border wall of Denmark. And as far as actual historical evidence goes for that, it's shown that the wall was built 200 to 300 years before Thyra and Gorm were around. But the couple did have a daughter, Gunhild Gormdottir, and two sons, Knut Gormson and Harald Gormson, which eventually inherited the throne and became known as Harald Bluetooth. Gorm died in the winter of 958. Grammaticus writes that his death came when he found out that his son, Knud, who was supposed to take the throne, died. It's thought that Gorm was buried under Thyra's stone in Yulling, or in the northern mound which Harald Bluetooth built for him, but was then later moved to the first church of Yulling by his son when he declared that Denmark was a Christian nation. Gorm's body was found in some excavations in the 1970s, and eventually in 2000 he was reburied in the new church which stands on the same ground as the old wooden church his son buried him in. This time the royal family attended his reburial in 2000. Gorm, like the legends before him, is covered with mystery and contradictions, but he is really the start of the Kingdom of Denmark, and he's also the start of the modern Danish monarchy. I always thought Gorm was overlooked, and I hope someone learned something about him in this video. Thank you for watching.